dear YouTubers, welcome to another episode of Real Turkey channel. This time our regular guest host, Miss Guldem Atabay, is with us. She's a renowned economist of her own, as well as a columnist and academician. Guldem, how do you do today?
Well, fine. Good, from Izmir.
Izmir, yes, it's a lovely city, much better than Istanbul. I want to jump right into the politics. Start with Idlib, I suppose. There's a ceasefire, but Putin and Erdogan apparently couldn't decide on how to divide Idlib. What do you expect to happen from now on? Will Turkey withdraw from Idlib, or will Turkey resist and try to defend Idlib city?
Well, it's a rough call because obviously Turkey doesn't want to leave Syrian territory, given that the Kurds' recent progress or relations with the U.S. government at the cost of Turkey's deterioration in the U.S. government. So it has to stay there. In order to stay there, it has to balance its relations with the Russian wing and the U.S. wing, the Trump administration, obviously. What the Russian Mr. Putin is demanding is for Turkey, for Erdogan, to cut his support, his relationship with the Free Syrian Army contents within that region.
Brigades,
which means,
factions,
yes,
whatever they are. We don't know what they are.
However we call them, we don't have very clear information on who those people are. But obviously what Putin sees is that these people having relationships with the very Islamic, radical Islamists in the region, radical Islamic terrorists, maybe we can say, in the region. So maybe the negotiations would be Turkey cutting ties or support or diminishing support to such fractions, as you put, in order to remain its position in that territory. So maybe a shift of those operation points or watch points could be in the cards. Maybe the negotiations will involve Turkey's diminishing support to those agents who are seen as terrorists by the Syrian official Syrian government, Mr. Asad, and Mr. Putin as well. So in order not to lose its territorial presence in Syria, I think Erdogan is open to further concessions on that front.
Let's move to the other side of the river Euphrates, which divides Syria from north to south. There were actually tripartite negotiations between Turkey, US, and the Kurdish entity dominating the area about a safe zone, which I thought were going very well. We were about to close a final deal, but on the weekend, Mr. Erdogan burst out and he said, unless Turkey gets all of its demands, Turkish military will enter the area and occupy the safe zone by itself. What went wrong, and do you really expect a Turkish military campaign in northeast Syria?
I think a Turkish military campaign would be awful for the region, for Turkey, economically and politically, without the, I don't like to say support, but without any permission from both sides, the Russian side and the US side. But the safe zone agreements or negotiations they are blocked because of the presence of YPG over there, which is seen as a terrorist ally or as terrorist as what PKK is for Turkey. Obviously, they are working together with the US government over there. And Turkey wants this safe zone free from the YPG members, soldiers, presence, politicians,
terrorists,
guerrillas,
whatever the hell they are, yes.
The name can change depending on where you're looking at them from. Yeah. So I think the present negotiations are stuck at that point because Turkey doesn't want any of that YPG presence there. But what I read from the press is that the US government is negotiating very harshly on one YPG presence equals one Turkish soldier presence, that kind of negotiations. So I think that's unacceptable from Turkey's side. But whether these events could stretch out to the point of a military incursion without the consent or the approval from the US government consent is to be seen. So I think these were threats from our President Erdogan to speed up negotiations, to leverage, to be used as a leverage in the future. But I think Turkey is getting weaker and weaker in the Syrian game that it's playing so far.
Let's move on to the S-400 issue. We know Trump doesn't want to impose any sanctions on Turkey, but I'm aware of several legislative attempts in the American Congress to bypass Trump. And I think in September, they are going into session again. Have you heard anything about that? Is there really a movement to issue new legislation to punish Turkey?
I think that's probable, but with a delay. The Turkey's recent announcements coming from the defense minister saying that Turkey would prefer or would have to prefer the Russian-made fighter planes, Su-57s, I guess the name was, over F-35s produced in the US, and they were blocked. Their sale were blocked to Turkey because of what has been going on in Syria. I think that kind of movement towards that purchase could speed up sanctions from the S-400 side as well. But these are, again, political negotiations. So far, what we know is such moves or such legislations have been frozen or have been freezed by the US president to be maybe applied in the future down into 2020. And as far as we know, these Turkish threats to invade northeast of Syria could just turn the scale back, and Turkey could face this punishments again as an immediate agenda item in the near future. But these are to be seen, and these are, I think, important, serious threats that are hanging in the months ahead.
So a critical month in September at home too. Mr. Erdogan has spent the summer bashing his new opponents, Ali Babacan and Professor Davutoğlu. How does AKP feel about these potential new parties? Is there a threat perception? Is Erdogan threatened by them?
I think very much yes, because what we know is throughout September and maybe in October too, Erdogan will be traveling across Turkey to visit the AKP points, the cities, its organization parts,
strongholds,
the AKP.
yeah.
Its strongholds, trying to convince people that everything is going fine within the AKP, that the economy will function well. That in the next round of AKP Congress, which was pulled earlier into this year, that those people who are going to lose their seats or their strengths within the party should remain. He has to convince those people to remain within the AKP. But at the same time, as we know, the economy is not doing that much very well, so that people are still reflecting their discontent about what the government has been doing. The formation of new political parties is speeding up, especially in this winter. I think things will get more tangible. And these all will be attraction points for those unhappy people within the AKP. So I think that is a very much serious threat in the eyes of our President Erdogan. Not maybe Mr. Davutoğlu, but the team, Gül Babacan team. I think it's more of a serious threat in the eyes of the AKP's integrity.
Of course, there is the issue of the Kurdish vote. Still half of the Kurds vote for AKP, but after the sacking of 3 HDP mayors and this talk about one-sided incursion into northeast Syria, where mostly Kurds live, how do you feel about the Kurdish vote? Are they eager to jump boat to Ali Babacan or Davutoğlu? Could that upset the balances in Turkish politics?
Well, it depends. I think there will be many things that will be on Babacan and Gül's agenda when they prepare or come up with a party program. I don't know what their party name will be, but one of them they will have two basic structures, I believe. One of them will be on the economy front. One of them will be on the political front. Basically, human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and everything that has been deteriorating in Turkey rapidly over the course of the last couple of years. And Kurdish issue is, of course, the major one on that front. If Babacan team comes up with a credible plan to support this deterioration on the freedom of expression within Turkey, the quality of democracy, if he signals a joint effort could look feasible with the Kurdish HDP, as this current opposition CHP is trying to do right now, I think he will be able to, or he has the potential to attract some part of the Kurdish votes towards his party. But I think HDP will remain as the Kurds' main party in the near future. And any political party that wants to progress on the Kurdish issue will have to work together with the HDP in the future.
Let's move on to the economy, because if I understand your statements correctly, Erdogan's fate and Ali Babacan's fate, for that matter, largely depends on the performance of the economy. Let's start with national income. Today we received the second quarter growth figures. Turkey has grown for 2 consecutive quarters. Do you find these figures realistic, and how do you feel about the composition of growth?
Well, realistic, that's very much debatable.
That depends Turkey. On where you sit.
Where you sit, exactly. But we have to look at the trends within the figures, I believe. So what we have known is, since the start of the year, the government has been heavily spending on the fiscal side through various support schemes in order to pull down the interest rates, especially in the construction sector, especially to speed up domestic consumption. So that should be creating some form of slowdown in Turkey's economic contraction. On the other hand, the base year effect is also working, as last year's base year was slowed down up until June, and then rapid contraction in the third and especially in the fourth quarter. So these are showing itself in the numbers. But when we look at the composition, it's kind of scary, because what we're looking at is investments, real investments in Turkey, the capital investments. I'm looking at the numbers. It has been down by 12.4% in the first quarter. And
that's
this contraction,
year-on-year or quarter-on-quarter?
Year-on-year.
Okay, yeah, they give
for
it
the first quarter. So it has increased to 23% for the second quarter. So almost a double of the contraction on capital investments. On the construction sector, respectively, 15.6 contraction increased to 30% contraction in the second quarter. This machinery and equipment contraction was 8.6 in the first quarter. It has increased to 16.5%. So nobody's spending, everybody's carrying, is withholding their cash or whatever they have. People are refrained from making investments in Turkey. So where we see growth is coming partly from consumption of the household. It has been down by 1.1%, but it's again
but rose by quarter-on-quarter, I understand. Rose by 3% by quarter-on-quarter.
Yes, yeah. Quarter-on-quarter. So we've seen the public spending again, and net exports helping us on the growth side. So public spending, looking at the performance in the first 7 months of the year on the budget side, we see that there is no room for further crazy expenditures that were done in the first 7 months of the year. So we have already reached the end of year fiscal deficit targets. We know the revenues are below half of what the inflation figure is. So that's why the government has been motivated to use the central bank resources on the various levels to stimulate growth. So that's almost ended for the second half of the year. So their game plan appears as this eagerness, this ambition to reduce the policy rates, the central bank rates, is the main reason is that this economic contraction needs to be smoothed out and turn into positive growth in the future. So basically they don't have further room to spend on the fiscal side. Their whole bet is lower interest rates, and maybe the Turkish consumers and the investors will get back into the market to start increasing their borrowing rates and start spending again. But I think that's a very weak plan because people are already paying their debts that were accrued in the past couple of years, especially the Turkish real sector. So even if the base year will be pushing growth to the positive territory in the final quarter of the year, the growth prospects for the coming at least next year is very weak, in my opinion. So these figures are not well at all, in my opinion.
Before this broadcast, you were on Turkish version of Bloomberg, and the presenter asked you about the inflation. Do you expect single-digit inflation within 2 months? What is your year-end forecast?
Well, last year's jump on the inflation front was focused on September and October because of the currency meltdown that took place in the second half of August. So this year there is room for further downside on the headline inflation front, but the government has been introducing natural gas price hikes, electricity price hikes, all these price adjustments to help on the revenue front of the state companies that are almost standing cashless, unable to roll their or carry out their obligations on the payment front. So I think these will be preventing the inflation from touching the single-digit levels in the couple of months ahead. And my end-of-year inflation estimation is around 15 to 16% still.
That's CPI, right?
CPI, consumer price inflation, yes. And it's just because the food prices will speed up again in the winter months, as they have already started as of August this year. Looking at the prices of lemon and everything, that we can see that.
Yeah, you know better than that. I mostly Jack Daniels and cigars and caviar. Yeah, the prices are going down there.
Yeah, for gin tonic you have to use lemon. And there's further room for lira volatility, I guess, and further lira weakness in the months ahead, just because the central bank will be slashing its policy rate further down the road.
Let's get to that. So I got your opinion, but let me just ask the question. I mean, okay, so inflation is falling, which probably presents some opportunity for rate cuts. Fed probably will cut rates. That's good too. But the emerging markets environment is awful. Emerging markets have left behind the worst August in 22 years. And then we got Argentina, we got Hong Kong, possibly Lebanon default. There is no money coming in emerging markets. Would lower rates are really feasible, or would they really lead to another episode of devastating currency depreciation?
Not maybe devastating, but just because the central bank and the managers who are directing the central bank to cut the policy rate, which we well know is that Mr. Erdogan is the one. I think before they see any movement on the lira front, they will not refrain from cutting the policy rates, just because the emerging market flows are getting drier and drier, or just there's unexpected crisis is happening on the Argentina front in September and in October as well. Before they see movement on the lira front, I think they will be motivated to pull down the policy rates just for the sake of growth. And that will leave lira prone to further weaknesses in the months ahead. Maybe not at a devastating level, but at some level that will be noticed in the markets, I believe.
Well, thank you very much, Guldem Atabay. I think I have learned everything that needs to be known about Turkish politics and economy. Dear YouTubers, you have watched Ms. Guldem Atabay, and I'm your regular host, Atilla Yesilada. Real Turkey channel is an effort to reflect the Turkish voice in English language to the entire world. Leave us your comments, and if you like the video, please share it or subscribe. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.